Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to take a minute to acknowledge something. This episode is being released during Men's Mental Health Month, and honestly, I couldn't think of a more appropriate time to have this conversation. As men, we're taught to keep moving forward no matter what we're carrying. We're taught to be tough, to handle our problems ourselves, to push through. And while there's value in resilience, I think sometimes we confuse resilience with silence. The reality is that a lot of men are struggling. A lot of men are carrying things that they've never talked about. Things that they should be able to handle that they think they should be able to handle on their own. Things they've convinced themselves aren't affecting them. Until one day, they realize they are. First responders, I think that challenge can be even greater for us. We're expected to be calm during the chaos. We're expected to show up when people are having the worst day of their lives. We're expected to be strong. But strength isn't pretending nothing affects you. Strength is being honest when something does. And that's what today's episode is about. It's not easy for me to talk about, but if hearing my experience helps even one person feel less alone in what they're carrying, then it's worth having that conversation. So, wherever you're listening from, thank you for being here, and let's get into it. Welcome back to Under the Vest. I wasn't sure if I wanted to record this episode. Not because I don't think it's important, but because talking about this means that I have to admit to something that I've been trying to convince myself wasn't true for the longest time. And that truth is, I've been struggling. And as a police officer, that's not always something that's easy to say out loud. Over the last several months, I found myself thinking about a call from the past more and more. A call that I thought I had processed. Honestly, a call that I had thought I moved on from. But the reality is, I haven't. And if I'm being honest, I think I've spent a lot more time trying re-traumatizing myself because of it. Today's episode isn't about the details of the call. It's about what happens when a call follows you home. It's about the trauma. It's about the triggers. It's about the nightmares. It's about carrying something long after everybody else thinks you've moved on. And honestly, if you're a first responder listening to this episode, there's a good chance that you've experienced something similar. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about this job is that we just simply move on. And honestly, that's what I thought too when I first got into law enforcement. I thought tough calls were just part of the job. You handle it, you move on, you answer the next call. But honestly, the longer I've done this job, the more I've realized that some calls don't just stay at work. Some calls will come home with you, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. For a long time, I thought strength meant pretending that those things didn't bother me. I thought that if I could show up to work, still do my job, still function, then I must be okay. But functioning and healing aren't the same thing. And honestly, I've learned that the hard way. For a long time, I convinced myself I was fine. I wasn't missing work. I wasn't falling apart. I wasn't doing anything that would have made anybody else think that I was struggling. From the outside, everything looked pretty normal. But trauma doesn't always show up the way people expect. Sometimes it shows up quietly. Sometimes it waits. But eventually, it started showing up in my sleep. That's when the nightmares started. And that's when I realized something just wasn't right. The thing about the nightmares is they don't ask permission. You can spend an entire day telling yourself that you've moved on. Then when you wake up, at 3 a.m, suddenly you're right back there. You're back on that call. You're back to feeling those emotions. You're back seeing things that you'd rather forget. And honestly, in those moments, it doesn't feel like a memory. It feels real. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't just reliving the call in my sleep. I was reliving it during the day too. I'd think about it while driving. I'd think about it while sitting at home. I'd think about it at work. And every time my mind went there, I started asking myself the same questions. What if I had done something differently? What if I had gotten there sooner? What if I had made a different decision? The what ifs. The problem is those questions never led anywhere. There's never really a satisfying answer. Before I knew it, I was spending more and more time mentally living in a moment that had already happened. I think I told myself I was trying to process it. But honestly, looking back at it, I think I was trying to find a different ending. I wasn't trying to change something that I was trying to change something that couldn't be changed. And every time I replayed it, I reopened that wound. Nobody was forcing me to relive it. I was doing it all myself. Eventually, it started affecting more than just my thoughts. Trauma has a way of leaking into every area of life. The sleep became difficult, the nightmares became more frequent. Some days, I found myself mentally exhausted before the day even started. There were times when I became irritated more frequently, times when I felt disconnected, times when I couldn't stop thinking about the things that I'd rather forget. The reality is, trauma doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just looks like being tired all the time. Sometimes it looks like carrying a weight nobody else can see. And after a while, the weight gets pretty heavy. One thing I've realized, though, is a lot of us carry these things in silence. As first responders, we're often expected to be the calm ones, the strong ones, the people others rely on when the things go wrong. And because of that, it can feel difficult to admit when something is affecting us. There's always that fear that we have. What will people think about us? Will they see us differently? Will they think we can't handle this job? And the truth is, I think a lot more people are struggling than we realize. We're just not talking about it. And that's part of why I wanted to make this episode. Because I'm finally starting to learn some things about healing. I don't have everything figured out. Honestly, I'm still working through this. But I've learned that trauma doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. I learned that healing isn't something that happens overnight. I've learned that talking about it really does help. I've learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. I've learned that being affected by something doesn't make you less capable. It makes you human. If another officer came to me and told me they were struggling after a difficult call, I probably would tell them to give themselves some grace. I'd remind them that they're human. I'd tell them that they did the best that they could. The hard part is learning to give ourselves the same grace. If there's one thing that I want the listeners to take away from this episode, it's this. If you're listening to this, you've been carrying around a call for months or years, you're not alone. If you're waking up from the nightmares, if you're replaying events in your head, if you're questioning yourself, you are not alone. We wear a vest to protect us physically. Unfortunately, there isn't one that protects us emotionally. The best thing we can do is acknowledge what we're carrying and to start dealing with it. Thank you for listening to Under the Vest. Take care of your mind, take care of your people, and stay safe.